It's weird, right? Whatever. Might as well check it out. I haven't seen a horror movie that's actually scared me in a while. That was the last text Lacey had sent me before she went missing. I know it's irrational, but I hate myself for not doing something. For not stopping her. But how was I supposed to know? How could I have anticipated anything that was going to happen after? The film, or whatever the hell it is, made its way into our small town like a plague only a few days ago. 12 people bought tickets for it. 12 people are now missing. Among them was Lacey, my girlfriend of over 2 years. At the risk of sounding like that guy, our future was looking nothing but promising. We have plans. Well, we did. Until Mr. Blank showed up. This is nowhere near a conventional missing persons case, of course. The rabbit hole goes deep here, and honestly, the details simply don't make any sense. From what I managed to dig up, this is a general timeline of what had happened. An option to buy tickets for the film shows up at one of the 3 theaters in our town, which is about a 20-minute walk from my house. Only that one, and it wasn't available online, only at the front counter of the theater itself. It wasn't supposed to be in the regular rotation. Also, none of the employees of the theater were informed about any special screening. They simply came in and saw that it had replaced a 5:30 p.m. slot for a pre-existing film. They didn't question it, because why would they? The first and only screening was at 5:30 p.m. that day. The theater wasn't the busiest, but it wasn't empty either. Of course, most people opted to skip out, given the lack of any information regarding the film. With that being said, the only people who bought tickets were younger and likely curious about the title. The film lasted about 1 hour and 10 minutes, with all the previews and credits considered. Pretty short for a feature, huh? At 6:40 p.m., an employee entered the theater for cleanup duty. What he found were rows and rows of empty seats, with drink cups still in the holders and popcorn littered all over the floors. No blood, no signs of a struggle. Nobody had left or entered the theater after the film had begun, with confirmation from the security cameras. The theater itself had no cameras inside, so that part remains a mystery. The screen allegedly consisted of nothing but a dark static. That's what we were told, at least. I have a feeling that some details were left out from there, considering the fact that the employee in question is now missing as well, also rumored to have gone into a catatonic state after being questioned. The manager of the theater, who never greeted the employees that morning as he usually did, was found dead in his office with severe wounds around his neck from a plastic bike lock that was likely used to strangle him. A new employee was hired about 3 weeks prior. The other employees described him as a quiet but nice guy. He was working the day of the incident. And, you guessed it, he's missing as well. Also, suspect number 1 in the investigation. But they're really grasping for straws at that one. I wouldn't doubt that this employee had something to do with it, but the logistics behind the whole situation just aren't cohesive enough to make that call for sure. Some additional details. No copy of the film has ever been found. No progress has been made in the search for the missing people. Hell, it hardly seems like they're even trying. The local cops have been strangely hush-hush about the whole thing, almost like they don't want people asking about it. They literally threatened to arrest me when I kept pressing them for details. There's been a lot of vehicles with tinted windows parked near the theater and surrounding areas, some even in my own community. Well, that's the situation. I can't focus on anything right now. My brain's scattered and my anxiety's been going through the roof. Sue me, what the hell do you expect? Lacey has to be out there somewhere, right? How in the hell is somebody supposed to just disappear into thin air? And what the hell kind of film was Mr. Blank? Christ, I'm getting a headache just thinking about it. My initial grief has been replaced more so by confusion and anger. I might just start searching for answers myself. I won't be alone, though. Rose, Lacey's best friend, and Mike, her brother, are just as bent on figuring this out as I am. I'm not going in blind, though. In fact, I have two leads. One is more of a shot in the dark, but the other should lead us somewhere concrete. I'll start off with the former. A few weeks ago, I remember my little brother telling me about a strange man he saw carved into a tree. It was allegedly accompanied by messy and frantic repetitions of the word "stop" around it. I didn't think anything about it at the time, but it might be relevant now. Maybe not. We'll see. The other came up while I was searching for answers online. After feverishly posting about the film on what I considered to be relevant forums and yielding no answers, somebody finally messaged me about it, claiming that they had information that I might like to know. Luckily, they're only a 3-hour drive from here and are willing to meet halfway. Is this a bad idea? Probably. Am I gonna like what I find? Probably not. But the thought of Lacey being out there in God knows what kind of screwed up situation, I just can't take it. I'm not letting it end like this. And we're off. The person who messaged me, online named ScreenGrabber22, told me to call him Jay. He's agreed to meet up at a diner in a town about 1.5 hours from us and 2 away from him. He seemed genuine enough while I was talking to him online, but intentions can be hard to ascertain over text. Still worth a shot, I guess. I'll do anything to figure this out. Mike was all in from the get-go. I suppose I felt safer with him around, given the fact that he stood at 6'2", 200+ pounds, and boasted a 650-pound deadlift, and had a borderline obsession with both French kickboxing and long-range shooting. Obviously, he didn't like the idea that something might be happening to his sister. Hell, I had to stay on my toes just to stop him from knocking me out when he found out that Lacey and I were first dating. He was also pissed as hell at both his parents for being so complacent about the situation and the cops for not yielding any results. On the other hand, Rose was a bit wary about the situation at first. Couldn't blame her, really. This shit was weird. But at the end of the day, we all really wanted to find Lacey, enough so to venture off into what was ostensibly a dangerous unknown. The drive over was uneventful, which I suppose was a good thing. I had a feeling that the humdrum nature of our little trip wasn't gonna last, though. "What a seedy-ass place," Mike stated as he stepped out of the vehicle. I couldn't disagree. Flickering fluorescent lights peeling paint in a nearly empty parking lot. A place that truly hadn't caught up with the times. Guy was probably bullshitting about knowing anything. If he got us out here to try something, I guess I'll blow off some steam by stomping his head in. Hey, I expected nothing less from him. "Anything to find Lacey, but don't do anything stupid. I know you're gonna," Rose said, before taking the lead and heading towards the entrance. "Hey, wait up," Mike called out, running after her. I took a deep breath before following suit. This was happening. We were taking matters into our own hands. The place was sparsely populated inside, about 6 other people in total. Gray hoodie, black hat, gray hoodie, black hat, I muttered to myself. Jay's outfit of choice, apparently. It didn't take long to spot him. I was relatively relieved upon seeing that he was on the younger side. He looked just slightly older than us, probably early 20s, late teens. Nothing terribly noteworthy about his appearance. A skinny guy with medium-length, dirty blonde hair. "Jay?" I asked, approaching his table. When he looked up, I realized that there was something off about him. His eyes, they looked a little unhinged. Low-key, though. That's a strong way of describing it, I guess. But there's a reason why that was the first word that popped into my head when my pupils met his. He gave me a slight smile before awkwardly gesturing for us to sit. "So," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. His movements were also rather jittery. "You want to know about the movie?" We all nodded at once. He let out a weird noise, like something halfway between a sneer and a cough. "But why? How do you even know about it to begin with?" "Doesn't matter why. We just want to know. Don't tell me you're about to waste our time," Mike spoke up. He tended to get quite dramatic sometimes. "I'll tell you what you need to know," Jay said, after a few moments of silence. "All right, get on with it." "You guys need to drop it. Stop thinking about it." Christ, what the hell did I just say?
"I'm not wasting your time. I'm saving your lives."
Just as Mike seemed to be reaching his wit's end, which wasn't hard to get to, mind you, Rose chimed in.
"What do you mean? Look, our friend went missing. We're not leaving without something. Please?"
Her tone was a lot softer, which seemed to calm Jay down.
"I'm sorry that happened, but I don't think you're gonna find her."
"Son of a bitch," Mike said, slamming the table. Jay flinched at the action.
"Look, I've given you the best advice that I can. Just leave it alone."
"If that was the case, you wouldn't have agreed to meet up. There's clearly something that you feel we should know."
"No."
Jay shook his head.
"If I left it like that, you would have kept digging deeper. I called you here to convince you to let it go."
"Ain't gonna happen," Mike said. "So either you tell us something, or you say goodbye to your teeth." "Ignore him," I chimed in.
"But you gotta tell us something, like what the hell Mr. Blank is supposed to be."
I was getting desperate. My hopes had been spiked, perhaps to an unreasonably high degree, but I still wasn't prepared to just leave it at that. I needed something. I could see Jay's bottom lip quiver just slightly upon hearing the question.
"He's..."
Jay muttered. It looked as if he could hardly muster up an answer. He looked terrified, which in turn terrified me. At one point, it seemed as if he were about to cry, but he took a deep breath, seemingly calming himself down.
"So, you guys aren't gonna let this go?"
I shook my head. "How are we supposed to?" He clicked his tongue in a frustrated tone. His previous face of distress had morphed into something more comparable to anger, as if this whole situation was beginning to bother him something great.
"Okay, I guess you forced my hand."
He whispered something under his breath. It sounded relatively aggressive. Truth be told, Jay's reservation towards the situation was only spiking my interest even more. What was he so afraid of? He gestured towards the exit.
"Follow me, then. I'll show you something."
It was nearly a mutter. "Follow you," I thought. All right, then. I'm not a total idiot. The red flags were sticking out like sore thumbs. But at the end of the day, I suppose this is exactly what we were looking for. In my pocket, I gripped the stiletto knife from Italy that Lacey had gotten me a few months back. Just in case, you know. With all of us on high alert, we walked out of the diner and began following Jay's beat-up Jeep. The subsequent drive wasn't long, probably only around 3 to 4 minutes. An inherent symptom of small towns, I guess. He led us to a small motel. It was kinda dingy, but not terribly so. Nevertheless, it was another cause for concern. He only lived 2 hours away. Why stay the night? He sighed as he exited his vehicle, gesturing us up the stairs. We ascended 3 floors and walked past a few doors before arriving at his room. Mike and Rose walked in first, and then I followed. Big mistake. So, what did you want to... Before I could even finish my sentence, my vision went black. I'm not sure how long I was knocked out for, but when I came to, I was lying on the couch, nursing a splitting headache. Yo, he's awake. Mike's booming voice felt like a hammer to my brain. I looked up and saw him holding Jay in a headlock. There was a baseball bat lying a few feet away from them. Rose was standing at the foot of the couch, looking relieved that I wasn't dead. Oh, thank God, she said. You won't be thanking anybody when she shows up. I'm trying to save you, you idiots. Jay rasped out, struggling for air. What happened wasn't exactly a mystery. Jay had tried taking my head off with a damn baseball bat. With my brain still reeling, I pulled myself off the couch and approached him, all while he struggled against Mike's python-like arms. So, I said, still wincing, what the hell was that? Jay's face was starting to go beet red, so I gestured for Mike to loosen his grip. He began panting like hell upon being released. Who the hell is Mr. Blank? I'll ask you one more time, or do you want to explain to the cops why the hell you just assaulted me? His expression had changed drastically. Not so angry anymore. He looked more defeated. I tried, he said in a hoarse voice. Tried to do what? To save you people, to save myself. So what the hell was your plan? Knock us out and then what? I don't know. I panicked and didn't know what to do, but I had to get you guys to stop somehow. You forced me to, he said, nearly in hysterics. I get it now. You're a crazy guy. We've been talking to a psycho. Good job, guys. Was that it? I thought to myself. Were we just wasting our time talking to a guy who'd clearly gone off the deep end? I wasn't so sure. I'd had encounters with the criminally insane before. My father had worked security at a psychiatric ward, and I'd visited him there a few times before. This guy? He didn't fit the bill. I suppose his words sounded genuine. Of course, I couldn't know for sure, so I remained cautious. Jay slumped against the wall, tilting his head back against it. I never could escape him. I don't think anybody ever does. Who? I asked, already expecting the answer that I was about to receive. He looked over at me directly. Mr. Blank. His voice quivered. It seemed as if merely saying the name caused him a great deal of discomfort. I don't know where he came from, what he even is. We kept quiet as he talked. We were finally getting what we came here for. He's incomprehensible. Imagine the worst, most visceral nightmare you've ever had. That's nothing compared to an encounter with him. You can't outrun him. You can't kill him. You can't deal with him in any way. And once he's after you, he won't stop. You just have to pray that you never meet him. A look of absolute grief suddenly washed over his face. But it's too late now. You've pried too hard. You've pried too hard. He's already on his way. You want to elaborate on that? I asked. He smirked at the question. It was one that unsettled me to my core. The smile wasn't even of joy or relief, not even close. It was more comparable to a smile that somebody in great pain would make upon learning that their misery would soon be coming to an end. I shouldn't have spoken his name again, but I guess it doesn't matter. This is the end of the line for me. As if he were a man possessed, he drilled his elbow into Mike's ribs and began scrambling away from him. He barreled past me and into the washroom, and before I could try and stop him myself, he locked himself in there. Shit, I muttered. I began banging on the bathroom door. What the hell are you doing? I tried talking some sense into you. This is my punishment for failing. What are you doing? What are you talking about, man? Come on, we'll figure this out. I can't deal with what happens next. My nightmare ends here. I'll pray that your suffering ends up being less than mine. A short silence followed. I'll pray for your friend as well. I suggest you do the same. Come on, man. Don't do anything stupid. Too late. I heard his body slump to the ground moments later, and when we finally got the door open, Jay was lying limp on the floor with an empty, unlabeled pill bottle next to him. Fucking hell, Mike said, sounding frustrated. Jeez, what the hell do we do now? Do we call the cops or something? Rose added, looking understandably horrified. Hell no, I'm not dealing with that. Let them find the guy themselves. He overdosed. Simple as that. He turned to me. You ain't bleeding, are you? I touched the back of my head. Dry. Good. No blood, no suspicion. Let's get the hell out of here then. That's not how it works. We also busted the bathroom door down, remember? He seemed to think about it for a moment before coming to his final, profound conclusion. Screw it. I had my own reservations about leaving the situation the way it was, but Mike was already out the door before I could say anything else. In the moment, there was nothing I could do but follow him. Call it selfish, but the situation was beyond helping at that point. But if you asked me if I felt somewhat responsible for Jay's death, then I'd have to answer in the affirmative. The feeling in my stomach as we walked to the car wasn't a good one. The drive back was relatively silent. We'd gotten next to no answers, had a hell of a lot of questions, and just witnessed a frickin' suicide. And on top of that, there was somebody following us. I don't think either Mike or Rose noticed it. After all, the driver was doing a good job of being discreet. But then I remembered the sketchy vehicles that had been parked around town. I looked back at the vehicle. Yep, tinted windshield. I don't think I'm gonna tell them. Nerves are already high, and abrupt panic probably isn't gonna help us here. One thing's for sure, though. The situation has gotten a lot more complicated. Is this asshole really following us? Unfortunately, they noticed. Shit, I said. This wasn't good. Nevertheless, both Mike and Rose were being rational about it. Although they were both visibly worried, they seemed to understand that freaking out wasn't going to help. Ignore them, I said. If they keep following us once we get into town, then I'll call the cops. Hang on, you don't think they saw us leaving the apartment, do you? They probably did. Why? A stupid question on my part. We totally left a dead guy in there. Shit. Maybe it's the cops themselves tailing us. That's so dumb for so many reasons. Why would the cops be following us to begin with? Who the hell knows what cops are thinking? They can't pin it down on us, right? We didn't do anything. They don't know that. They could argue that we forcibly shoved the pills down his throat and left.
Why would we do that?
I don't know, Rose. Why the hell does anybody do anything?
All right, relax.
I raised my voice just a bit.
They aren't cops, Mike. That's ridiculous.
All right, cop expert. Then who is it? I didn't have an answer there, but I knew one thing was probably for sure. Whoever was following us was probably worse news than the police. Try and shake him off, Mike told me. Yeah, no way in hell. I'm not a stunt driver. As I had hoped, the vehicle trailed off once we got into town. As much as I appreciated the initial relief, this just meant we had another thing to worry about. Another lingering issue. I thought back to the unfamiliar cars with tinted windows that had been parked around town. I didn't think about it too much in the moment, but the vehicle that had been tailing us had also been tinted. Shit, I thought. This whole situation was getting a bit too complicated for my liking. Not that this was an enjoyable experience to begin with. We parked at a nearby gas station, not wanting to reveal where any of us lived just yet. I still couldn't quite shake the feeling that we were being followed after all. Of course, Mike was against this. These sons of bitches probably know where we live already. I say let them come. My shotguns need some dusting off.
Okay, calm down there, Rambo. Before you get yourself killed, let's come up with a plan. An actual plan?
We ended up driving over to Mike's apartment after a few uneventful hours. But before we could come up with anything at all, Mike and Rose ended up passing out. I had no idea how they found it in themselves to sleep. After everything that had happened, I simply couldn't. Paranoia was also starting to creep up on me, causing me to constantly check the street to see if anybody was out there waiting for us. But as the night went on, nobody showed up. Either that, or they were doing a hell of a good job of being discreet. But eventually, I succumbed to fatigue myself. I woke up next to the windows, with the sun stinging in my eyes. Mike was cooking up breakfast sausages and Pop-Tarts in the kitchen. Breakfast of champions, I suppose. All right, Mike said through a mouthful of pork. Last night was bunk. What now? I suppose it was time for a shot in the dark. The forest. Mike and Rose weren't too enthused at the idea. I couldn't blame them, but our options were running relatively slim. No other avenues to really investigate. Graffiti in the forest. We're getting desperate, huh? Mike said, putting his head down. But he got up after only a few moments, grabbing for his jacket. Desperate it is. I never really liked the forest. The place always spooked me as a kid. Can't say I'm too fond of it as an adult either. It just feels so claustrophobic, you know? Surrounded by dead trees, but exposed at every conceivable angle. Maybe I'm just weird. I tried to suppress those thoughts when we walked in.
Where'd your brother say he found it?
Near the creek. Very specific. And what the hell are we supposed to do once we find it? I don't know. Maybe we'll find a clue somewhere. The words came out of my mouth with zero confidence, and it was obvious. What the hell kind of clue were we supposed to be looking for? As we continued walking, we passed the time by contemplating what Mr. Blank might be. A serial killer? And perhaps we needed to look at it from a supernatural angle. Some kind of monster, or demon maybe? But what was its connection to the theater? The whole situation was maddening to think about. Nothing made any sense. After about 20 minutes of inspecting each and every tree near the creek, we finally found it. The carvings that my brother was talking about. Huh, Mike commented upon seeing it. Pretty spooky. I couldn't disagree. It was more or less the way my brother had described it. Very strange indeed. It was difficult to make out any real features of the man depicted in the carving, but I guess it was a man. humanoid, at the very least. It appeared to be tall, wearing some kind of long, sweeping coat. There was a strange pattern covering the torso. Almost looked like bones. Hard to tell, given the nature of what we were looking at. And then there was the head. No facial features. Blank, if you will. And of course, it was accompanied by the word "stop" scribbled all over. I could only describe the nature of the writing as distressed. Was it just a coincidence? I doubted that. What the hell are we getting into here? I heard Mike say under his breath. I looked over at Rose, trying to gauge her reaction as well. She certainly looked frightened, as expected, but not in the same way that Mike was. The fear on her face appeared to stem from a more urgent matter. "Do you guys," she began to ask, "don't panic, but I'm pretty sure someone's following us." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I realized something. We'd been careless. Even though we were being tailed last night, we didn't bother carrying that caution over to the morning. Hell, I didn't even look over my shoulder when I'd first walked into the forest. Mike clicked his tongue loudly, looking agitated. "All right, asshole, come out." "Jesus, Mike," Rose and I said in unison. "I don't want to draw this out." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a pistol. "Gotta come prepared. Learned that yesterday, didn't we?" The next few moments comprised of a tense silence. Well, maybe not. I'm pretty sure everybody could hear my heart beating out of my chest. "All right." I flinched as a voice called out from an undisclosed location. "Suppose there's no point in keeping this up. I see you have a gun, kid. I'm coming out, so don't shoot." I could see movement within the maze of trees. Mike clicked the safety off and aimed the weapon right toward the general area it was coming from. "Are you dumb? And I ain't no kid. I'm 24 years old." Whoever had been following us didn't hesitate, continuing towards us. "It's not like your age makes you less of a kid. I've known 13-year-olds that I would already consider men, given what they've been through." The voice eventually revealed himself. He looked to be in his early 30s, dressed in a windbreaker and well-tailored dress pants. He was about a head shorter than Mike, with wavy hair, a clean-shaven face, and a world-weary look in his eyes. There was also a substantial scar running down his cheek, but beyond that, he was incredibly good-looking. Not an important detail, but whatever. "You're not going to shoot me, kid, so why don't you stop pretending like you're even considering it?" he said, in just about the most confident tone I'd ever heard in my life. Mike gripped the pistol, the veins bulging in his hand. "Don't push your luck." "I'll introduce myself," he said, ignoring the threat. He reached into his coat pocket, which made Mike flinch, and pulled out a pretty official-looking FBI badge and identification card. His first name was Sven. His thumb was covering up his last. Maybe it was a conscious decision. "I'm not really concerned with whether or not you believe my credentials, but I'm curious. What are you kids doing out here?" "Why the hell should we tell you?" Mike asked, still trying to sound assertive. Sven sighed before looking at Rose. "Darling, could you please ask your friend to put the gun down? He's going to get himself hurt." He looked back at Mike. "Keep it in your hand if it makes you feel safer, though." Rose obliged, nudging Mike. "Come on, that's not going to end well." Mike mumbled something angrily before obliging himself. Sven nodded and smirked. "Now, regarding my question, what's the deal here?" He was certainly pretending like he didn't already know. "The missing people," I said. "I'm sure you're familiar with the rest of the details, probably more so than we are." He nodded before looking down. "Yeah, it's a strange case." Mike scoffed. "Strange? My sister's missing. If you know what the hell's going on, then tell us." He looked back up at us, an inquisitive expression on his face. Maybe that's what I'm trying to figure out myself. And that's when he dropped the bombshell on us. He wasn't actually here on official business. He was essentially after the same thing that we were. This wasn't the first instance of Mr. Blank causing somebody to disappear. His fiancée, Sarah, had gone missing a few years prior. Hauntingly similar circumstances. He tried looking into it, but his higher-ups told him to stay away and wouldn't give him any information or leads. Mr. Blank was an utterly classified topic, and ever since then, he'd been chasing after answers and trying to unravel this obscure mystery, but not with much luck. But there was an opportunity here. This was the first time that Mr. Blank had made an appearance since his fiancée went missing. Without telling any of his fellow agents and without the discretion of the higher-ups, he'd come here to conduct his own investigations, all while attempting to stay hidden from the agents already posted here. The tinted vehicles, that's why they're here? Yep, they don't want anybody prying. Probably for the best, but for obvious reasons, I can't stay away. Yeah, likewise. So it was you following us last night. He raised an eyebrow before shaking his head. Shit, sounds like you've caught their attention. Then why are you following us now? Rose asked. He looked at Mike. You're Mike Karen, right? Mike gave a slight nod. Lacey Karen was one of the people that went missing. I was aware of the whole thing. I took a shot, assumed you would try doing something about it. When I saw you guys leave town yesterday, I got even more curious. I couldn't have followed without giving myself away, though, so I kept an eye on your apartment. And then you walked into the forest first thing this morning. Interesting behavior for sure. So, prove my intuition right. What do you know? Because I'd love to know as well. His tone had taken an intense turn. It was pretty obvious that he was driven by passion, which I could understand, even if mine was to a far lesser degree than his. Truth be told, we really don't have much, I told him. I felt embarrassed, even considering showing him the tree carving as some kind of evidence. Perhaps my passion really was clouding my judgment. Maybe we really were just grasping at straws here. But then Sven took a look at it himself. I expected him to scoff, and possibly make some kind of sarcastic comment to the effect of, "Good job, guys, you really cracked the case here." But instead of doing that, he began studying the carving rather intently. After a few moments, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Look familiar?" he said, showing it to us. After nearly gagging at the initial sight, I had to admit that it was. A tall humanoid, a sweeping coat, a skeleton torso, a blank face. And this time, it was drawn in blood on a dirty basement wall. There was also a man with his entrails leaking out and kneeling down towards it. "Oh, hell," I muttered, trying to hide how much I was shivering. "You sure you're supposed to be showing us this?" "I'm not supposed to be doing a lot of the stuff I'm doing right now, but here we are." "What the hell is it? A crime scene?" Sven nodded. 2.5 years ago, about the same time Sarah went missing. Don't know the details because I wasn't there. Risked everything to get my hands on this. Despite how gruesome it was, the crime scene pretty much confirmed that there was some kind of connection here. But the question remained, what now? Where do we go from here? "Guys, check it out." She pointed to another tree up ahead, maybe about 20 feet away. Could it be? I thought, approaching it. It was. A similar carving had been scribbled into it. The same figure, the same word. I began scanning the area once again. There was another tree, a bit farther away this time, and then another one, and another. The four of us began following the carvings like a trail of breadcrumbs, right towards what had to be the culprit behind them. We didn't even hesitate. Didn't stop to ask questions. We were driven by sheer impulse at the revelation. But clearly, Sven was paying more attention than us. After a few minutes, I felt him put a hand on my shoulder "Wait," he said. "What? Why? You have a gun, don't you? So does Mike. We'll be fine." "Not that. Look forwards, but stay calm." And then I saw it. There was something up ahead. A large figure doing a poor job of hiding behind a thin tree. I could see a large, pale, bony hand twitching erratically as it dropped near the ground. A quiet but shrill noise suddenly began to fill the air around us, like a combination of a high-pitched radio frequency and some kind of deranged laugh. I suddenly remembered what Jay told us before he died. He's already on his way. I was frozen. Absolutely, unequivocally frozen. I could only describe the fear that gripped me as visceral, like I was drowning in a freezing lake of incomprehensible dread, unprepared to face what was already ahead of me in the slightest. I looked at Sven, the most capable one out of all of us, but even he looked petrified, his face drained of any color. I looked back at the trees, watching as the pale, gargantuan creature wrapped its disturbing hand entirely around the tree. The high-pitched radio frequency laugh continued around us, seemingly growing louder and louder by the second. And then it stopped. "What are you looking at?" A deep, slimy, penetrating voice assaulted my ears. It nearly sounded like it was coming from my own head. I flinched, and taking my eyes off the entity behind the tree for just a moment, it was gone when I looked back up. "Seth?" I heard Rose call my name out. I whipped my head around, nearly passing out in fear upon seeing what was behind me. It was him. Blank face, skeletal torso, giant bony hands, leering down right at me, only a few inches away. Without even thinking, I began running. I turned back after a few seconds, watching as the creature's body twisted and contorted, turning into a massive spider-human hybrid with tens of pale, veiny limbs crawling towards me. I nearly threw up right there. Sven drew his pistol and began shooting. Due to how erratically he was moving, he missed every shot except for one, which drilled straight through the creature's head, causing a wave of thick, black blood to burst out from the other side of its temple. It went limp immediately, with its limbs crumpling and falling to the ground. For a moment, I suppose I was relieved. But then I realized what kind of monster we were really dealing with. The laughing had come back, louder than ever now. "Oh, that hurt." I blinked once and the corpse had disappeared, and then I noticed a hulking shadow looming somewhere next to me. I looked over, watching as the creature, now back in its humanoid skeleton form, wrapped one of its hands around Sven's neck. With the other one, it grabbed one of his wrists and instantaneously crushed it into a bloody pulp. As Sven grunted in agony, the creature turned to look directly at me. The bottom half of its face began distorting, and soon enough, a human mouth emerged from underneath its skin. If I was close to puking before, I couldn't help myself now. I retched before looking back up to see it smiling at me. Not only that, the smile was familiar. Soft, pink lips, glowing white teeth that were just slightly crooked at the bottom. It was Lacey's smile. "What are you doing, Seth? Come find me." It was her voice, unmistakably identical. I heard myself whimper. I blinked one more time and it disappeared again. Sven dropped to the ground, still grimacing at his gruesome injury. Mike and Rose were in abject shock, and I could feel tears beginning to swell in my eyes. "Start running." Again, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. I began hearing what sounded like heavy, animalistic movements approaching fast. I turned around, seeing something barreling towards us. It looked comparable in appearance to a gorilla with dark fur, but with about 3 times as many limbs, running at us like an oversized centipede. And of course, A familiar blank face at the front. He wasn't even giving me time to grieve. Safe to say, we took the advice and bolted like hell the other way. And every time I looked back to see if it had finally caught up, the creature always looked like it was moving at an unfathomable pace, yet it always remained the same distance behind us. After a while of this, it really felt like I was losing my own grip on reality. As we began reaching the edge of the forest, I remember my vision beginning to blur. I passed out, likely due to a combination of exhaustion, fear, and agony, upon hearing Lacey's voice and seeing her lips on that fucking monster. I woke back up in Mike's apartment, clothes dirty, cold sweat running down my forehead and my joints aching like hell. It had become dark outside. I suppose I'd been out for a while. Mike and Rose were sitting on the other couch, neither saying a word or even looking up. Can't really blame them, not after an experience like that. "Where's Sven?" I finally asked. "He left. Drove off, said he had to do something urgent. Never even went to the hospital before leaving town. I don't think he's coming back." Guess we aren't getting any more help from him, I thought to myself. I decided to stay at my parents' place for a bit. They were happy to see me, but I wasn't really there emotionally. I hated to admit it, but the encounter had taken a lot out of me. As much as I still wanted to somehow save Lacey, I couldn't stand the idea of facing that thing again. I needed time to overcome my fears, time to recover, before looking for any more answers. But Mr. Blank wouldn't even let me do that. For the first few nights, everything was normal. I used some of my vacation days to get off work and spend my time watching TV, playing games, and trying to motivate myself to stop being so scared and to go looking for her again. Wasn't working so well. I was still petrified at the very thought of it. But after a few nights, the tapping started. It sounded like a bony finger rapping on my window during the dead of night. I never bothered looking, of course. When I didn't react to that, Mr. Blank began messing with me in more severe ways. I'd see a hulking shadow behind my shower curtain seconds after I'd stepped in. A pair of legs sticking out from underneath my bed as I was getting ready to sleep. An unwanted passenger in the back seat of my vehicle at night. Employees following me around grocery stores and staring at me in restaurants. I never could make out any of their facial features. It was all starting to take a heavy toll in my mind. I could feel my sanity slipping away by the hour. I called Mike and Rose. The same story. Rose's voice was monotonous, devoid of any kind of emotion. Mike sounded like he was on the verge of tears. But what made everything infinitely worse was the knowledge that at any point, he, or it, could kill me in a split second. So that begged the question, why didn't it? What was the point of fucking with me like this? It all came to a boiling point while I was grabbing my mail. As I was getting ready to reach in, a bloody hand poked out of my mailbox and handed me my envelopes. How generous. It was all starting to become rather bothersome. I freaked out right then and there. "Screw you! What the hell do you want from me?" I grabbed the door of the mailbox and slammed it into the hand until I heard the bones begin to break. For the first time in a while, fear wasn't my dominant emotion. It was anger. After enduring the punishment, the hand eventually retreated. I bent down, staring directly into the now empty slot. "Where the hell is Lacey, asshole?" My screams were beginning to attract the attention of my neighbors. Not that I cared. I could hardly keep my frustrations in at that point. I had to let it out. "Why don't you just kill me, you son of a bitch? Guess I'll come and kill you first." I hardly believed in what I was saying. The words were simply pouring out of my mouth. I slammed the door shut and stormed back into my home. I took some time for self-reflection. The cops had told me to let it go from the start. Hell, even my own parents were telling me that. So why hadn't I? Why couldn't I just let it go? Maybe it's because I hadn't lost hope. For one reason or another, I still believed I could get Lacey back, that I could somehow overcome this horrific, seemingly impossible enemy and come out victorious in the end. After all, Mr. Blank could imitate Lacey's voice. Maybe that meant she was still alive. Perhaps that was a stretch, but I didn't allow myself to believe that. It'd be comparable to admitting defeat right then and there. There was also another thing driving me forward. If I didn't face it head on, this thing was never going to leave me alone. I remember what I'd told myself from the beginning, that I wasn't going to let it end like this. Whenever I'd backed down from a conflict before, my father had always told me to grow a pair of balls and man up. It made me kinda hate him at times, but suddenly, that seemed like rather sound advice. I spent the next few days getting off my ass and preparing to head back into the forest. I was going to keep following the street carvings, our only real lead, wherever that may lead me. It was pretty obvious that physical attacks weren't going to bring this thing down. Hell, I wasn't even trying to kill it. I needed information first, like where the hell it was keeping Lacey. Physical wounds did seem to bother it, in some marginal capacity at the very least. While I was brainstorming, I noticed something else as well. Ever since the mailbox incident, the bastard had left me alone. My first act of defiance against it. There had to be a correlation there. I decided to call Mike and Rose again. They still sounded frightened. Defeated. Mr. Blank was still going after them. What did this mean? I only had my theories, of course. Nevertheless, they were theories worth testing. I began putting together my own mini arsenal. My dad's pistol, one of Mike's shotguns that I borrowed a few weeks back, a hunting knife, and a baseball bat for good measure. Was I trained in armed or unarmed combat? The hell no. Still had a chance, though. I decided to head back into the forest exactly 1 week after I'd gone in. I'd made my preparations, of course. Wrote a letter for my parents, in case I didn't come back, a letter for Mike, one for Rose, and didn't even bother asking them to come. They sounded like they weren't even ready to leave their rooms when I talked to them last. I wasn't quite sure what to put in the letters. I just felt obligated to write them. An explanation, I suppose. Before heading out of my house, I slugged back 1 swig of whiskey and 2 cups of coffee. I tried to calm my nerves. Didn't really work. Didn't matter. Before I knew it, I was standing back at the edge of the tree line, alone. I took a step. Deep breath. Another step. Oh, shit. The nerves had come back. One more step and my legs began shaking. It's as if the fear I'd been suppressing began rushing back to me all at once. I looked up, and something caught my eye. A large figure obscured by the woods, creeping along my line of vision. A familiar hand wrapped around one of the trees, dangling a severed hand by the pinky. Sven's hand, most likely. It was taunting me. Every fiber of my being was telling me to turn back and run the hell away. And I nearly did just that. I was petrified, but that didn't mean I could stop. This thing wasn't going to stop following me at the forest. It knew where I lived, knew how to push my buttons, how to get under my skin. It knew nearly everything about me. I was too deep into this mess already. Face my fears and deal with it myself, or end up like Jay and leave Lacey trapped in whatever hell she was currently in. With that in mind, I took another deep breath and began walking, right towards it. As I had suspected, it disappeared shortly after, like I'd somehow scared it off. Even though that probably wasn't the case, I smiled to myself, reveling at the idea. From there, I began following the carvings, retracing our steps from a week prior. But I was planning on getting further this time. As expected, Mr. Blank didn't leave me alone after I'd entered. In fact, I was pretty much on my toes the entire time. About 5 minutes in, I heard something breathing down the back of my neck. I remembered what happened to Sven and immediately pivoted sideways. At that point, it was the closest I'd ever gotten to it. This time, it had taken a gargoyle-esque form, wings and all. I pulled out my pistol and fired about 4 shots at it. I never had great aim, so only one bullet even grazed it. But I think my message was sent, because it disappeared with a blink immediately after. It hurled its share of auditory torments towards me as well, screaming horrible things at me in a generic demonic voice. The only time these things really affected me was when it was imitating Lacey. Gosh, this son of a bitch was really pissing me off. It appeared 2 more times before it finally managed to hurt me. But the attacks were awkward. It obviously could have killed me at any point, yet it seemed bent on trying to give me only non-lethal injuries. Nevertheless, it succeeded. Have you ever seen fan art of the Rake? A classic creepypasta. And that's what it turned into, only with no face. It managed to slice my thigh, and not a deep cut, but it still hurt like hell, and I responded by breaking my bat over its head. Even though doing so caused it to disappear, it was a move I regretted instantly. I lost one of my close-quarter weapons. I used to play baseball, but I never used a knife or anything beyond chopping onions. I calmed down by telling myself that at the very least, it wasn't going to kill me. Boy, was I wrong there. After about only a minute, it crawled out of the dirt in the form of a familiar, machete-wielding zombie wearing a hockey mask and nearly took my head off. I managed to dodge the swing by a hair, and the tree beside me was sliced clean in half. I guess Mr. Blank was something of a cinephile. I suppose that made sense. That didn't look non-lethal to me, I thought to myself. I scrambled to pull out my shotgun and blew off the wannabe Jason's head, but it took both shots to do so, and I wasn't very fast at reloading. Mr. Blank suddenly appeared behind me, now as a hulking, faceless clown carrying what looked like a lead bowling pin. And at that moment, I was defenseless. It swung the pin, breaking the shotgun in half as I attempted to defend myself with it. After that, I started running. What the hell was I thinking? This asshole could basically teleport. It suddenly stepped out from a tree in front of me, and this time, it had turned into one of the nurses from Silent Hill, bolting at me with a rusty knife. "Ah, shit," I shouted. It looked like Mr. Blank wasn't pulling any more punches. It caused me to experience a new kind of fear. Not dread, or some vague fear of the unknown. It was fear of immediate and certain death. But at the same time, I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I tried to convince myself that I was ready. Knowing that I couldn't run, I pulled out my own knife and tried bracing myself. This is gonna hurt, I thought. As it got within a few feet of me, the crack of a heavy shotgun caused me to flinch. The nurse was subsequently sawed in half at the torso, with stray fragments of buckshot littering the trees beside me. "What the hell?" I shouted, panting at the same time. "Hey, boy, you best not be taking the Lord's name in vain there." An unfamiliar voice, a heavy southern twang. We weren't anywhere near the South. I looked over, seeing 2 wholly unexpected figures. One was Sven, with heavy bandages wrapped around his wrist. He wasn't the one that had fired the shot, though. And standing next to him was a tall, bulky man with messy blonde hair, wearing what looked like a heavy tactical jacket and camo hunting pants. He was carrying a massive, industrial-looking shotgun. Certainly not anything police-grade. Hell, I don't even think it looked like something the military would use. "Anyway, it's your lucky day," the man said, slinging the weapon over his shoulder. Sven looked at me and smiled. "I told your friend I was coming back. I don't think she believed me, though. He looked at his shotgun-wielding friend. So, what did you think? Told you I had something big. The man chuckled, watching as the nurse corpse disappeared into thin air, just as every one of Mr. Blank's forms tended to do. Well, I'll be, he said, smiling to himself. It's a strange one for sure. No matter. I'm itching for a good old-fashioned battle. What the hell? It was the only thing I could muster out, given how truly bizarre the circumstances had become. Hush up there, the man said, aiming his shotgun at something behind me. Looks like it's itching for the same battle. I turned around, watching as Michael Myers dropped down from a tree. Only he wasn't carrying a kitchen knife. He had a damn chainsaw. Looked like Mr. Blank was getting his films mixed up. Asking any more questions seemed like a lost cause. In any case, I needed to focus on the task at hand, staying alive while searching for Lacey. But it looks like I have some much-needed help now. Can't complain about that.